It's Christmas in July here. I don't know when you're watching this, but if you're looking for a fun and festive, very forgiving, low stress project, this is it. This whole tutorial was inspired by Bob Ross and his happy little trees, if you remember the painter Bob Ross, and his philosophy that there's no mistakes, just happy little accidents. We're going to make Christmas trees today, and we're going for variety. So some will be short, some stout, some with skinny trunks, wide trunks. And we're going to be using a form of improvisational piecing. Some people get scared by that word, but really all it means in this case is if something's too long, cut it off. If something's too short, sew something onto it. It's as easy as that. So what I have are 4 fat quarters that go reasonably well together. And I've stacked them up. Now these are pre-washed, which is why they have kind of a little bit of funky stuff around the edges, which is absolutely fine because we're going to cut that off later. So I've got 4 fat quarters and I divided them in half, lengthwise and crosswise. Lengthwise and crosswise. There we go. So each stack is approximately 9 inches by about 10.5 inches. This fabric on the top of this pile is just a little bit short. The rest of them actually are 10.5 inches. That's not going to matter because these are improvisational blocks. But this gives us a good start. So I'm going to set 3 of these stacks aside for now and just work with these. And I'm going to pair these up. I'm going to use those 2 together and these 2 together. Let's start with these 2. So I'm going to stack these up. Now, because this selvage is a little bit wider and I want to see where it is, I'm going to put that one on top. And you'll notice they don't match exactly. Doesn't matter. So I've got them lined up here, and I'm actually going to swing that around. So this is actually going to be the bottom of the block. So if I grab one of these finished ones like this is going to be this piece right here. So you can make it whatever width you want. I started out cutting mine about 2 inches wide, but after making a bunch of blocks, I decided I wanted a little bit more variety. So I'm going to cut this one actually, let's say about 2¼ inches wide. So I'm just going to go like that. Okay. So now this is going to be the bottom piece where the trunk is going to be. So I'm just going to set that aside for now. And this I'm going to rotate because this is going to be the tree, where the tree is. So the next thing is move this out of the way so I don't accidentally cut it. And we're going to make our first cut. Now these are happy little trees with no mistakes, just creativity. So the only thing that we're going to be really watching is to make sure that we've got at least 1 inch between the edge of the fabric and where we start the cut. And then I want to end up somewhere not too far off the middle. It's okay. It's a little ways. So let's try this. So this first cut, I'm making about 1 inch here and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches there. Now I'm not telling you that so that you start doing that as a rule. This is just an example. So there we go. There's our first cut. Now we need to make the second cut. Now, if I cut it way up here, 1 inch in, and then cut it way up here, we might run into a problem at the top and not really have enough to trim the top of our block. So we actually want to come down a good inch or 2, 1.5 inches, maybe 2 or so, somewhere in there is a pretty good way to do it. So here we have our next cut. Okay. So there we are. That's all there is to it. And now, so that it looks like a tree, we're just going to swap these around. Okay. And while these are here, I'm also going to cut these in half, and I'm just going to fold that. Okay. That's where the middle is. And I'm just going to cut that. This is where we're going to insert the trunk. So now I'm just going to grab a couple of design boards to keep these in order while I'm working. So I'm going to put this block up here. There we go. And if I can get these apart, there we go. Okay, like that. And then down at the bottom, it'll be like this. Okay, now remember, we're going to insert a trunk. We haven't done that yet. We don't need to worry about that yet. And then on this other one, there we go. Okay, so by having them, let's get this block out of the way. By having them on the little design boards, and I have different size design boards, I'm using the smallest one just because they fit better in frame on camera. By keeping them together like this, it'll help prevent me from mixing up the pieces when I sew them. So I'm going to take these little boards to my sewing machine, and the first thing I'm going to do is sew this piece to this piece. And I'm going to do that for each of them. And to do that, I'm just going to flip this over just like this. And this one, the points are actually going to look like they match up. Okay? Now, after we've sewn it, you're going to see it looks really funky. But for now, that's what it's going to look like. So I'm going to take this to my machine, and I'm going to sew right here with a 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to sew right here with a 1/4 inch. Okay, so I was so excited to get going. I actually just stitched through the first one. But now I'm going to leave my presser down, take a few stitches on air, and then start stitching on the second one. And I have a 1/4 inch foot on, but you don't have to. You can use whatever foot you like to use. Okay, so I'm going to cut this, take this off, and I'm going to cut them apart in a second. But this is how it looks after you've sewn it. Here, let me get that so you can see it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this over to my iron. I'm going to put these back on my design boards, and I'm going to take this over to my iron, and I'm going to press these open. Okay, so I've got these sewn and put back with their pieces on the design board. And you don't have to use a design board. That's fine. If you can keep it together without one, that's okay. Now I need to sew this to this, but you can see that we've got this bit sticking out. That is fine. We're just going to get rid of it. The first rule of improvisational quilting is if it's too long, cut it off. And by the way, the second rule is if it's too short, sew something onto it. So it's easy peasy. So here's this one. Now, if you want to, you can, try to offset that so it comes out. I'm not even going to worry about it. I'm just matching point to point, knowing it's going to be a little wonky. That doesn't matter. So there's that one. And if you want to, you can stick a couple pins in there. I don't usually. I'm going to stick a couple pins in there just so that you can see what I would do if I was pinning. Okay, so there's that one. And then here's the next one. And you can see, same thing. We're just going to get rid of that little bit. These are really easy to do. Okay, just got rid of that. Then we're going to take this piece. And you can see it's going to go right there. So again, the easiest thing to do is to be point to point, starting at the bottom. I'll stick another couple pins here. And then we're going to go and sew right here and right here with 1/4 inch. And I like to chain piece whenever I can or batch sew. So if I was doing this just myself, I would prep at least 4 at a time. I'm just doing 2 at a time for this, just in the interest of, making a video that's not 3 hours long. But you get the idea. We are still going to do a little bit of time-saving stuff by putting that on its design board and this on its design board. And then I'm going to grab the tree trunk and we're going to sew that in at the same time. So here's my tree trunk fabric. Now you could use different scraps of brown or whatever color you want to use for your tree trunks. I'm using the same brown throughout just to have one less thing I need to think about since everything else is going to be different and scrappy. So the first thing I'm going to do is just even up this edge because it's a little bit wonky. Get rid of that. Okay, so then let's see, is this, yep, that's going to fit. So let's see, how wide do I want to make it? I know that I want it to be at least 1 inch wide, which means I would cut it at least 1.5 inches with the seam allowances. But I want to make this one a little bit wider. So I'm going to go ahead and cut one of them at 2 inches. And let's cut the other one at 2 1/4. So it's just a little bit wider. Okay, and there's no rules on this. You can make this as wide or narrow as you want, as long as you still have room for seam allowances. So then I'm going to bring this over to the design boards. So this is going to go here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll stick a pin here. Again, I don't usually pin, but so that you can see which ones I'm planning to sew, I am going to go ahead and pin. So I'm going to pin it to that, sew that way. Then I'm going to open it up and sew it to this one. Over here, same thing. I'm going to place it like this. Right sides together. I'm going to be sewing along that edge. Once it's sewn, I'll open it up and sew it to this piece. All right. So now I'm back to the sewing machine. All right. So my pieces are sewn and return to their respective design boards. Now I'm going to do some pressing. Now I do want to point out my mat is not on my cutting mat. I've got a board under there to insulate it so that the heat won't go through to my mat underneath. So let's take this one first. And you can see it lines up down here, not there. We don't care. It's absolutely fine. So I'm going to press from the back and I'm going to press to put a little bit of pressure here and just straight across. So it's nice and flat. Flip it around. And you can see this is not a fancy iron. This is actually my mother-in-law's reject iron because I need to replace my iron. It finally died. So I'm using this one in the meantime. And this one, see, last time I pressed towards the tree. This time I'm going to press away from the tree. And honestly, it doesn't matter too much whether you press towards the tree or away from the tree, as long as you don't end up with a big lump right here. So if I look at some of my other blocks, I actually pressed away from the tree, away from the tree. You can see, pressing away from the tree. So here, I just forgot, press the other way. But it doesn't matter because look at how flat and nice everything still is. And that's what's important. So there's that and that on its little board. And let's take the other one. We're going to do the same thing. Going to press the trunk, seam allowance towards the trunk. And again, you could press it away if you prefer. I just like the way it looks that way. Okay, and then here I have it this way. So now I'm just going to press this way. And you notice I pressed this just because that's the easiest way to get that seam over. But then I'm going to press like this and like this. This is pressing with the grain of the fabric. And that's helpful because it prevents your block from getting all cattywampus and out of whack. Okay, so pressing with the grain this way and this way. And now I'm ready to put this back on my little board. And now you can see we're ready to sew this to this. But before we do that, we're going to need to do a little trimming. Just like I said before, if it's too long, trim it off. If it's too short, sew something onto it. In this case, we've got this bit hanging off. Okay, you can see that's a little bit uneven. Doesn't matter. This is a very forgiving technique. There we go. And actually, I'm going to flip that around. And then here, we're going to use the base of the tree as our guide. And we're just going to trim these little bits off. Okay. So now I have a nice straight edge. And you can see this overhangs it on both sides because we inserted that extra fabric. So I don't get, overly anxious about matching this up perfectly, but I just try to eyeball it so it looks centered and then flip it over. And again, if you want to pin, I suggest a couple of pins. And I don't usually pin, but if you want to pin, I like to pin over here and over here. And you notice I'm not pinning this way because if I pin here, I can sew the whole length of the seam without having to worry about moving pins or hitting pins. So that works well for me. So then he can go back on his little board and let's do this one. Same thing. Technically, we could just sew it onto this edge, but since this is hanging off, I'm just going to go ahead and trim that while we're in the neighborhood. And let's grab this one. Same thing. And if you're interested in design boards, I do have a handy video that shows you how to make your own design boards without sewing and without hot glue. So check out my channel if you're interested in that. So here we go. This is ready to sew. And again, I'm just going to eyeball it, line it up, flip it over. Now, if you have directional elements, you might want to make sure that everything's going the same way. This looks fine. And there we go. And again, if you want a couple pins, you can. Let me find a couple pins that are not mangled. Here we go. I hid my good pins so that the kitties wouldn't steal them. So these are the ones that are out. So we'll just go ahead and use these. Okay, so now I'm going to take my little design boards to my machine. I'm going to sew just like that and just like that. So here's our two little blocks that we're working on. I'm going to go ahead, take out the pins. Now, to help this stay nice and flat, that seam stay nice and flat, I'm actually going to press it first on the back side, just moving up and down with the grain of the fabric. Then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to press it. Actually, I want to do it the other way. I'm going to press it towards the tree. So visually, the tree is higher than the trunk. Right? And, again, it doesn't make a huge difference. It's up to you. And I'm going to, most of the movement be side to side. but I'm also going to be doing a little bit of this, always pressing with the grain as much as possible. So here we go. There's the first one. And then let's move him out of the way, for them out of the way, and look at the next one. Here we go. I'm going to flip it over, give it a little press. This is called setting the seam. Just give it a little press. And then I want the seam to go towards the tree. So I'm going to start here and just move up and straight across, up and straight across, and also down. Notice I'm not going kind of every which way. That helps your block stay a little bit more stable. Okay, so there we go. Here are our 2 blocks ready to be trimmed. All right, so I'm going to show you how I trim them next. So now we're ready to trim these down. Now, if you were using unwashed fat quarters, your fabrics would be a little bit larger than mine to start with, and at this point, you could probably trim them to 7.5 by 9.5. But I'm using all pre-washed fabric because I'm using fabric from a variety of sources, and I do have a video on pre-washing fabric if you want to know more about that. But the point is, mine have shrunk a little bit. The fabric is a little bit smaller, so to make it easier for myself, I'm going to trim mine to 7 by 9. And I have my ruler and some painter's tape. This is just regular old painter's tape. And I'm going to find my 7 for 7 inches. And I'm going to put my tape just below that. I don't want to block that line. I want to be able to see it clearly. But I want to be able to find it easily. Then I'm going to get another piece of tape. And this time, I'm going to find the 9. And there's my 9. And again, I'm not blocking that 9. It's just below it, but it's going to make it easy to find 7 inches by 9 inches. And then I will take my square, and I'm going to do this on the side because that's a little bit easier to show on the camera. And I'm going to center this on my block. Okay, so this is 7 inches, so it's about 3.5 is the center. So I want it more or less centered. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm also taking a look up here. I've got that selvage. I want to make sure that selvage is not going to be showing. And I want to make sure this line, this seam, is pretty straight. Not the end of the world if it's slanted, but I want it pretty straight. So there's one cut, there's the other. Then I'm going to lift this up, grab this by the corner, and just wing it around. If you have a rotating mat, that works well, but you don't actually have to have one. All right, and again, I'm going to line this up with my 7 and my 9. And because my tape is just below, it's easy to find the line, and I can also see that the edge of the fabric goes right to the line. Then, wing, and there's my block. Okay? And this one is a little off center, which is fine. I like that wonkiness. Here comes the next one. So I'm going to lay it like that. And this one, I'm going to slide this up just a little bit. I have a little more room because this one was taller. And I'm going to line here. Okay, I'm still good. And I'm going to go like that. And that. And then I'm going to wing it around. Line this up again. And go. Huh? And what? Okay. And there we have our second block. Now, and again, you see it's a little off center, but as long as I've got my 1/4 inch seam, I'm fine with that. Now, I made a bunch of these blocks, and I found that they were looking kind of samey. So I started experimenting. See, this is looking, here's another one. This one, the trunk is skinnier, but otherwise it's similar. So then I started experimenting. Well, what if I made the tree skinnier? Or what if I added some ground in front of the tree and pushed the tree back? I thought, oh, I like that better. I like having the variety. Again, there's a skinnier one. Here's a skinnier one. There's a wider one, but it's pushed back a little bit off center there. Here's a really wide trunk. You get the idea. You can do so many different things. There is no wrong way to do it. I am going to take another set and just show you by example. So here's our next set. And you can see it's a little bit taller this way than it is this way. So I'm going to turn it on its side. And this time, we're going to make 2 cuts in order to have a little background showing. And you want this to be at least 1.5 inches or so, probably. Inch and a half from the bottom. Okay, so this is going to be below the tree. And then this is going to be with the area where there's the tree trunk. And this time I'm going to make a skinnier tree trunk. So I'm going to cut this at 1.5 inches. And there's no magic to this. As long as you leave yourself room for your 1/2 inch seam allowances, you can make this whatever width you want. Okay. And then I'm going to go like that. So this is in front of the tree. This is going to be where the tree trunk is. I'm just going to go ahead, since I'm in the neighborhood with a rotary cutter, I'll go ahead and cut this in half right now, where we are going to eventually put the trunk. Okay. And then I'll go ahead and set these over here on their respective design boards so I don't mix anything up later. Now these pieces, the colors stay with the same color. All right. Then we'll take this one, and I think I'm going to make this one a little shorter than the other one. So I'm going to come in. I'm still going to start at least 1 inch. I'm actually going to go 1 inch, maybe 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches. Let's make a skinny one. So I'm going to go about 2 inches from that edge and then up like this. This is actually 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And again, those numbers are not rules. Actually, let's make it 4. Those are not rules. I'm just explaining exactly what I'm doing. Okay. So there's that. There's that cut. And then I'm going to come here. And if you're left-handed or right-handed, you might find it easier to cut on this side first or cut on this side first. That doesn't matter either. Whatever you're most comfortable doing is going to be fine. So then let's make this one. I want to make sure I've got enough room for a seam allowance up there. And this is going to be another one that's off-centered. Let's go like that. Okay. Okay, so now this is where we swap the trees. So that's going to go there, and that's going to go there. So now we can put these on their respective boards. Let me get the ruler out of the way and the tape. All right, so this will go here, here, and here. And the thing to remember when we sew them is we're pretty much going to sew in the opposite order that we cut. Now notice we have this blank spot right here where the trunk is. We haven't added that yet. So here we are on the 2 design boards. And we're going to take these 2 pieces because these are the last 2 that we cut. And we're going to go like this. And again, you can just match those points up is probably the easiest thing to do. And you don't have to pin if you don't feel you need it, but go ahead if you do. Just handle these edges gently because they are bias and they are stretchy. So you want to not stretch them as you go. So we have that one, and then we'll just kind of lay it back on its board so we keep everything together. Here's this one. We're going to do the same thing. And I'm going to grab a couple pins. And now I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch here and over here. And I'll be right back. Both our pieces are sewn. So I'm just going to pull those pins out. I'm going to press them so that the seam allowances go towards the tree. So first, I've just pressed it from the front, help set the seam. Then I'm going to flip it over and just gently go like that. Then I'm going to switch my iron and go like this. And again, I'm pressing with the grain, right? And then that can go live with its buddies. Here's the next one. I'm going to set the seam and then flip it over. And then I'm ever so gently, I'm on the slant here just in order to get that seam to go over. Just enough. And once it's going in the right direction, then I'm going to switch back to pressing with the grain of the fabric. All right, there we go. And he's ready to go live with his buddies. All right, so the pieces are pressed. Now, we're going to sew the other side on. And again, this is too wide. It's not even. So, it's too long. What do? We cut it off. So I'm going to take my ruler, line it up with the edge of the tree, and just go like that. Then I'm going to take my other piece. I'm going to line up this point with this point. Just like that. And again, if you're comfortable without pinning, then go ahead and skip pinning. I'll show you just a couple pins in case you want to. Just like that. Okay, then I'm going to put this back on its board. And let's go ahead and insert this trunk here. Now here's my scrappy chunk for trunk. So this is how tall that needs to be. So I'm just going to go like that. Okay, so now that gives me the right height. A little wonky, that doesn't matter. We'll trim it later. But that's wider than I want for such a tiny tree. So let's come in and let's cut this about like that. That's going to give us a pretty skinny trunk once we get those seam allowances off. So I'll go ahead, pin this here. And he and his buddy can go back over there for now. Now let's do the next one so that I can sew them at the same time. Here we are. That's too long. So we're going to trim it off. We'll lay this over here, matching my points. And I did not use best press or starch or anything like that on my fabric. It's just washed fabric, and it's good quality fabric from Cotton Cuts. They're a great online store. I'll drop a link in the description. They have great sales too, so check those out. So there's that. Now I'm going to do the trunk here. Now again, I'm going to use this. Actually, it's going to be easier to cut this way. I'm going to use this to get about the right height. And I'm going to save this little piece because I might use that for a different tree. And this one, let's make just a little bit wider than the other one. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that a little bit wider just for variety. And I'll put a pin in like that. Okay, now I'm going to take this back to its board. So what I'm going to do is sew that seam, sew this seam, then open it up, sew that to it. Same thing with this one. I'm going to sew that seam, sew this seam, then take the pin out, open this up, and sew this to the other side of the trunk. And I'll be right back. Now, since, again, I pressed towards the tree here, I'm actually going to come in and press away from the tree for this seam, just so that it lays nice and flat. And again, if you want to, you can press both seams away from the tree. It doesn't matter too much as long as you don't end up with a big clump. If I pressed this like this, I would have a big clump. So you don't want both towards the tree. You want either both away from the tree or in two different directions. Okay, so there's that. And then let's grab this piece. And again, I'm going to go towards the trunk and towards the trunk. So we can see that all I have to do now is trim those edges so they're straight, and I'll be able to sew that on. But for now, we're going to let it all live on its little board and come back and do this one. Just kind of set the seam, turn it over, and again, because I've got this one towards the tree, I'm going to do this one away from the tree just to reduce bulk. Okay. And, I try to always tell you how I'm pressing my seams. And I'll try to tell you when it truly, truly matters and when it just makes things easier. This is a making things easier situation. Okay, there we go. All right. Now, we're ready to get the pressing mat out of the way, trim those up, and sew them on. All right, here we go. And again, and you know what? This is looking like a hot mess at this point. Don't worry about it. A hot mess is a normal stage for most creative projects. So don't let that throw you. If it happens to you, when you get to that point where you think, what was I thinking? This looks horrible. That's just part of the process. Don't sweat it. Now, you may be one of those lucky people that doesn't happen to, in which case rejoice and be exceedingly glad you are lucky. Most of us have a stage in our projects where we think that doesn't look right. But you know what? Keep going. And most of the time, it's all going to work out. So here's my trunk. And you notice this is way hanging off there. That looks better. Well, not that different. The point is this is more or less centered underneath, which is what we want. So I'm going to flip that up, stick a couple pins in. So that it's ready to sew. And this time, I'm going to sew that seam. I'm going to sew across there and then bring this down and then sew this piece on the bottom. I don't think you need to see that, so I'll do it all at once. All right, same thing. Here's this guy. Let's just trim the hot, messy portion off the bottom here. Just kind of straighten that up. So we have a nice straight edge. This one's actually not looking too bad. I think we can go ahead and sew him. So I'm going to center that more or less. Flip that up. Stick a couple pins in. Right, then I'm going to take him back to his board, and I'm going to go to the sewing machine, sew that seam, then open this up and sew the bottom piece on. All right, see you in a minute. Okay, these are sewn. And again, we're still at the hot mess stage, don't worry. I did want to show you something else. This one, do you see how we pressed the seam, this bottom seam, towards the tree? That makes a little bit of bulk here. If you wanted to, you could also press that seam open. And that's going to lie a little bit flatter. Okay. So there you go. If you really want it to lay flat, press that open. But I know a lot of you don't like to press things open. So if you don't want to press it open, you can press it up or down, whichever you prefer. Okay. Now we're coming to this one. And the reason I pointed that out, because if we turn this over, we can see we've got a lot of stuff going on. Let me pull that up so you can see it. We've got a lot of stuff going on. So I could either press everything down, which is probably what I would do, either press everything down. Technically, you could press it up. I don't think I would, but you can press it down, or we can press it open. And I think this is a good case for pressing it open. But what I'm going to do is first just press this side, not the seams yet. Then I'm going to turn it over. Again, just to get that started. And you see, I've got this wool mat, so it's clinging to the wool mat. And that already makes it easier to handle. Then I'm just going to come in and run my finger in front of the iron to help press that seam open. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Again, I'm just going to run my finger in front of the tip of the iron and press that open. And when we turn it over, it's going to be less bulky because the bulk is distributed. And so the front of the block, it's going to lie flatter. We're going to press again as much as we can with the grain of the fabric. And so there we go. All right, let's do the next one. And I'm going to do him the same way, I think. Because these are so narrow, I'm going to go ahead and press these open. Although again, if you prefer, you could press both seams down. I don't think I would press them up just because that's going to add a lot of bulk. I think it's going to be easier to either go down or press them open. So there's one side pressed open. And now I do the other. Sometimes I find it easier to get my finger in there first. There we go. And then get the iron ready. Okay. There it goes. And we'll flip that over. And we'll press with the grain. And you can see it's laying nice and flat. It's not too bulky, no weird bumps or anything. All right, so we're ready to trim. We're almost done. All right, now we're ready to trim him down. Here's my ruler with the tape. And I want him a little off center. But I want to make sure that I'm also hitting those lines. Remember, this fabric was shorter than the others, so you can see it's just barely going to be tall enough. But it is. Okay. And wing that around. If you find that your ruler is slipping and you have a hard time making these cuts, you can always, there it is, you can always do one of my favorite little tricks, and that is to turn your ruler upside down and then put one or more pieces of painter's tape on the back of a loop, just a loop like that. And you can put more than one. My fabric's not very slippery. If it was, I would put maybe a couple loops of tape. And then when you go to trim, it'll help keep your ruler from slipping. So that looks pretty good. And then you can rotate the whole thing a little more easily. Gonna line up. The only problem if you have the tape underneath is sometimes it wants to stick before you're ready. But there we go. That looks pretty good. Now, if I had, if I had 2 pieces of tape, it would work better. Got one, so that works. Okay, here we go. All right. And there's our block. All right, now you can see I've got an assortment of blocks in slightly different shapes and sizes, some wide, some narrow, some with a little of the ground showing in front of the tree, some where the trunk goes all the way to the bottom, some with a wide trunk, some with a skinny trunk, and that's just what I wanted, a nice variety of shapes and sizes. Now, this is completely up to you. There are no rights or wrongs. There's no rules to this. So if you want all your blocks to look about the same, you can. You might want to just keep track of the measurements and the angles you used when you cut them. If you want to make them even more different or different sizes, you can start with smaller pieces of fabric or larger pieces of fabric. There's really no rules. Now, if you would like some suggestions as what to do with these wonderful blocks, I'm planning a video to show you different ways of setting the blocks. If you want to turn them into a quilt top, or maybe a pillow top, or some other holiday project. So please subscribe, hit the notification bell if you'd like to be notified, and join me next time. Thank you.